Children's Commissioner for Ukraine says that they have 16,000 registered as having been taken, but in fact, she thinks it's a couple of 100,000. And the Russians themselves have talked about 700,000 having gone. So, I mean, these are enormous numbers of children.
700,000. That figure is breathtaking.
Yeah. So, I mean, because the Russians are actually public about this, they're not denying that they've got these children, but they're claiming that they're abandoned children that they've rescued from the war. This is very different from the stories of the parents that you meet who talk about how they actually were tricked into sending their children, or in some cases, entire orphanages of children have apparently been kidnapped and taken.
How did the parents say they were tricked?
So I met several mothers, all had similar stories, which was that basically they were living in a place called Kherson in southern Ukraine, and their children came home from school one day, and it was under Russian occupation. And they came home from school saying that there was a trip to a camp in Crimea, a summer camp or a football camp or a health camp, they were told, for 2 weeks. And it was going the next morning. And they weren't really given any choice. They were sent these forms. They were told to send the birth certificate of the children with them. And so the kids all went off. And after 2 weeks, they never came back. So some of the parents that I met, their children have been disappeared for 6 months now.
With no contact at all?
So some of them are in contact because the kids have phones. So they're in contact through channels like Telegram. It's not easy to make calls between Ukraine and Russia. So, but they are, the ones that I met are actually still in contact sporadically with their children. They haven't lost contact.
And what are they saying?
So they say, I mean, obviously they're desperate because they think they're never going to see them again. And the children are very upset. They say that they've been moved. So the camps they were at the beginning were kind of nice camps where they were for a couple of weeks. And they got to see dolphins and they had concerts. Everything was in Russian. And there was a lot of sort of Russian history and also singing of the national anthem every day. But after a couple of weeks, when they were moved to different camps, these camps are not so nice. And in fact, one of the mothers I spoke to, her son told her that he'd been moved to a camp which was like a prison and that they were being kept in really bad conditions. And he was phoning, crying and pleading with her to get him out. But when she goes to the school asking, can you get them back? The headmistress kept saying, don't worry, they'll come back. And then eventually just stopped answering the calls or disappeared altogether.
So we seem to be talking about something that is effectively state-sponsored kidnap on a colossal scale. Where is the international outrage?
Well, it's intriguing, actually, because I wrote about it on Sunday, but we've known about it for some time. I think it wasn't easy necessarily to get people to speak about it because some of the mothers thought if they spoke, it might harm their chances of getting their children back. But I did meet two who have got their kids back recently. And of this 16,200 that we know for definite that are documented, only 307 have been rescued. So that is definitely almost 16,000 that are missing. But as I said, the Children's Commissioner of Ukraine says it's hundreds of thousands.
You've covered many conflicts, Christina. Can you remember something happening on this kind of scale, particularly to children, before?
Not really. I mean, you had things like Islamic State in Iraq taking Yazidi girls and boys, but it wasn't these numbers, and it also wasn't this kind of thing, which is this like re-education camps. And I mean, the feeling is that the children have been taken in order for Russians to ultimately to adopt them, to make them into Russian children. And as I said to you earlier, the Russians have not hidden what they're doing, although they say that the children were abandoned. They've shown footage on TV of children, Ukrainian children, arriving and giving them teddy bears. And the Children's Commissioner of Russia has actually posted on social media that she adopted one of these children from Mariupol.
So the UN is saying all of the right things, though, isn't it? The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has said international humanitarian law prohibits forced transfers and deportation of protected persons, which may amount to war crimes. But I suppose what Jane and I wanted to try and get at this afternoon is just, if this is a war crime, and this is heartbreaking for the children and the parents involved, what, apart from words, can the international community do? And is there ever a time when an international force could actually go and get these children back?
I think, given the relations that countries outside have with Russia at the moment, it'd be very hard to do that. But you'd have to have some country that has good relations with both sides. Now, I understand that Turkey is trying to somehow mediate in this, but as I said, very little has been done so far. There suddenly now does seem to be a bit more attention. Lots of NGOs have put out a statement today about it. There's also a report come out, I think, by Human Rights Watch about the orphanages, because Ukraine had the highest rate of institutionalization of children in Europe. They had more than 105,000 children in orphanages. Now, lots of those orphanages apparently have wholesale all the children been taken to Russia. And so, that's why there's some confusion about the numbers, I think, because there's, it is a war. People don't necessarily know who to go to. And it sounds from the women that I spoke to in Kherson, in their case, they said there were about 100 buses came to take all these children away, with 30 children on each bus. So a huge number of kids were taken just from that one town. But the Russians have been doing this in every place that they've moved into, not just there.
Is there any possibility of the older children being able to escape and try to get back home, or is it simply not safe enough for them to even attempt to do that?
Be really difficult, because it would mean crossing enemy lines. And these few children that have been got back, now we don't know how all of them were rescued. I think there was a prisoner swap, but there's a Ukrainian organization called Save Ukraine, the head of which I believe is actually visiting the UK this week and talking to MPs. His organization managed to negotiate somehow with the Russians for mothers to go and get their children back. Very small numbers. 44 mothers on 3 different missions. But to do it, their children were only about 200 miles away from their homes. But to actually go and get the kids, because they couldn't cross Russian lines, they had to do this enormous circle. So they actually had to go, instead of going south to Crimea, they went all the way west to Poland, north to Belarus, then back east through Russia, down south again to Crimea. They ended up traveling more than 5,000 miles to get their kids. And of course, it was incredibly brave of the mothers, because they were going into a country that they're at war with, and they didn't know what would happen to them. They were very scared.
I'm really shocked by the scale of this, Christina. That figure of 700,000 is absolutely breathtaking. And the sad fact is, if some of these children are as young as 4 months old, the chances are that they will be, the Russian plan will be successful, I guess, and that they will be Russianified. It's a horrific term, but I think you know what I mean.
In some of the cases, the parents had been killed, so the Russians took, and it may be the case that people don't know that these children have been taken. The cases where I spoke to the mothers were all these ones where they'd actually been tripped through the schools. I mean, which is also shocking because
Yeah.
that means there were collaborators working at the schools, working with the Russians to do this.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
If you enjoyed that, what should people do?
Well, the best thing would be if you could listen to us on Times Radio, Monday to Thursday, 3 till 5, Jane and Fee.